You can start, sir.
1 second. I'll start, madam.
Start, Madi, sir.
Is it
You can
visible?
start. The slides are
Okay.
visible.
Yeah. Okay. So, hello everyone.
Uh,
So I'll
Sir, one
be
second,
covering
sir. Your
forensic
slide is
medicine.
not
Yes,
visible.
ma'am. Not visible,
Not
no?
visible, sir.
1 second. Let me see.
Now visible. Wait, one.
One, two words. Now
Yes,
it is
now
visible.
visible.
Yeah.
It's visible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. So, I'll be covering forensic medicine, and what I have done is I have divided the topics into blocks. So, how I've designed the sections is that first I will speak a little bit of theory regarding the MCQ, and then we'll go into the MCQ, and MCQs are interspersed into the lecture itself. Okay. So today's topic will be about legal procedures. As the name indicates, these indicates the various procedures which are followed in the law. And there is a famous quote in law which says, ignorance of law is excuse to no one. Okay. So with that, we'll start with what are the legal procedures. So if you see the criminal justice system in India, these four acts are important to know from a criminal point of view. First is the Indian Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code is the next one, Indian Evidence Act is next, and then comes the Code of Civil Procedures. Now, why these four acts are important? Because they deal directly with the criminal system. One important thing to note that is the highest piece of legislation in India is the Constitution. Please understand this properly. The highest piece of legislation which exists in India is the Constitution of India. Okay. So why I'm stressing on this? No law can be framed in India which can go against the Constitution. Okay, so you would have heard lawyers in television and media uttering the word as unconstitutional. Why they try to do that? So if you can prove some act or some law as being unconstitutional, then it cannot be implemented in India. So that is the whole purpose. So whenever there's a litigation, whenever there is an argument, so what the lawyer tries to do is he tries to prove that that particular piece of legislation is unconstitutional, meaning it's going against the Constitution. Thereby it becomes null and void. So that is how the people that is how the legal system exists in India. So none of these acts can contravene the Constitution. So Constitution itself has provisions for this act, and from the Constitution itself, such acts have been framed, and these are the important acts. Okay, so next. So what do you mean by the Indian Penal Code? So as the name states, it is applicable to India, and it is a penal code, meaning it will give the punishments, the code of punishments, different offenses and their respective punishments. Okay. So section 53 of the Indian Penal Code describes the various punishments which can be given to an individual for different offenses. So highest form of punishment which can be given is the, definitely everyone knows this is the death sentence. This is followed by the lower form of punishments will be the form of imprisonment for life. Then comes imprisonment which can be rigorous or simple. The next form of punishment can be forfeiture of property. So property can be confiscated by the court. Next form of punishment will be, so those are the various punishments. So next piece of legislation, that is Criminal Procedure Code. So as the name itself says, this gives the procedure for the various investigations or various activities which encompass a criminal investigation. Okay, so in this code, the procedure for various analysis, various actions are listed. Okay, so this was enacted in 1973, and so this is often used in trials and investigations. So this is also from the Constitution, and different classes of courts and their powers are described in this Criminal Procedure Code. Okay. So next piece of legislation is Indian Evidence Act. So this act deals with how the evidence need to be collected during the investigation, and in the trial, how they analyze the evidence. That is, whether the evidence can be accepted, whether the evidence can be refuted. So all this is dealt in the Indian Evidence Act. It was enacted in 1872. Okay. So next we will go into the inquest. Okay, this is the first thing we need to know in the legal procedure. So see, please remember this, wherever I comes, okay. So I'll just take a word, enquiry and inquiry. These two words exist in English. Enquiry starts with an E, okay. So if you see enquiry,
Sir,
hello, is it coming, sir?
some Balu did something. Say your side, sir. Okay.
Okay, sir, I'll
Some
continue.
student did a
Yeah.
mischief. Right, sir. Right.
Okay, no problem. So if you see enquiry, okay, if you see this word, so this is in English. This is just going and asking questions. Okay, something happened, you can do this, or someone does that. This is not a legal investigation. This is people just inquiring about some things. So this is what you do when you don't know something. You will go and find out what that is. That becomes an inquiry. Now, there's another word, inquiry. Okay. So wherever you add I, this I implies that it is a legal terminology. Okay. So when you say inquiry, it is done under a jurisdictional form, meaning there is some legal person there and he is following some legal procedure in doing that particular investigation. So in the same way, the inquiry is used for the framing of the word inquest. So what do you mean by inquest? We'll get to that. So inquest means legal or judicial inquiry into the circumstances and cause of death of a dead individual in cases of sudden, suspicious and unnatural deaths. Okay. So this itself says, see the starting words here, it says legal and judicial inquiry. Okay. So this is an inquiry that is to be done as per the procedure of the law into circumstances where there is suspicious death, meaning person has died because of unnatural causes or suspicious causes or hidden causes. For example, presently Sushant Singh Rajput's case is going on. There's a lot of suspicions regarding how his death has occurred, and there an inquest was conducted by the jurisdictional police, which was the Bombay police. Okay. So what are the different types of inquests? Now, police inquest is the first form. It is the most basic form of investigation, and it is followed under the section 174 of the CRPC. So other forms of inquest is magistrate inquest, that is under section 176 of the CRPC. Then comes the coroner's inquest, then there's medical examiner system, and then there's something called procurator's inquest. So these are different forms of inquest. So these two, that is police inquest and magistrate inquest, are followed in India. So other three systems are not followed in India. Just as a brief introduction, I will take up what is procurator's inquest. So this is what is followed under Scotland law. So there, the public prosecutor himself has powers for investigating. So that public prosecutor there is called as a procurator. So he has powers to go and order a postmortem investigation from a forensic pathologist and also submit that facts in the court of law, and he also argues the facts in the court. Okay, so this is followed in Scotland, it is not followed in other places. Whereas if you see this medical examiner system, this is considered to be the best form of inquest possible in today. Why? Because in this system, the doctor himself goes to the scene of crime, the doctor himself processes the evidences, the doctor himself does the postmortem. So, and the doctor himself heads the entire investigation. That is why it is called as the best system. It is followed in USA. In other countries also, some states follow it. But out of all the forms of inquest, this is considered to be the best because the doctor, he's a medical man and he himself is heading the investigation. So, and he's himself doing the postmortem. So this is considered to be the best of all types of inquests. Now, coming to India, I will take one inquest at a time. Okay. So what is police inquest? So as the name itself says, it is done by the police. Place of practice, where is the place of practice? It is practiced in the entire whole of India. Wherever Indian territory exists, the inquest is done by the police. So who can conduct and which cases? Okay. In all cases, most of the time, the most common investigation conducted is a police inquest, and the police person who is in charge of the police station does the investigation. Okay. Why I am saying this? Okay. So initially, the sub inspector was heading the police station. So if you see any police station, either in urban or rural areas, the head of that police station used to be a sub inspector. Okay. Now the laws are a little bit changed. Even head constables are authorized to do the inquest. So the correct answer for this question would be the investigating officer. So investigating officer will be the head of the police station, or it can be a senior head constable who will do the inquest. Okay. Which cases? So in all cases except in cases where magistrate inquest is done. Okay. Why I am saying this? Because magistrate inquest is more specific. There are some 6 cases where magistrate inquest is done. Leaving those 6 places, in all forms of unnatural deaths, police inquest is done. Okay. So how is this investigation or inquest done? Fine. So initially, when the police station gets the information regarding an unnatural death, the first thing the police officer does is he will inform the nearest magistrate. He will communicate the same about the death to the nearest magistrate. Then he will go directly to the scene of crime. Okay. On reaching the scene of death, he goes around inquiring. He constitutes a group of people called as pancha. Okay. So panchas are local people, local from that particular village, and they have good social standing. So 2 panchas are called, 2 or more can also be called, but usually 2 panchas are called, and information regarding the death is recorded. So paper is made, inquest paper is made, and the evidences are recorded on that paper from those panchas. So they give the details of how the death has occurred. So basically what the policeman is doing is inquiring why the person died and what are the circumstances prevailing to his death. Okay. So once those panchas give the information, that a panchanama is prepared. Panchanama is what? That is the information given by the panchas. So those 2 panchas sign at the end, and 2 other witnesses also sign, and the investigating officer also signs, and this becomes a panchanama. Okay. If there is no suspicion regarding the death, okay, if there is no suspicion regarding the death, the police officer who is the investigating officer gives the body for burial to the concerned relatives. Okay. So sometimes the person could have died due to known causes, like you're suffering from an illness, he passed away in the house. So illness is known, and no doctor is available in the vicinity. So there is no suspicion regarding the person's death. In those cases, panchanama is prepared. Police officer is satisfied that there is no foul play in the death. In those cases, the police officer can hand over the body for cremation, and the panchanama is sent to the nearest magistrate. Okay. But if there is a suspicion into his death, now we are entering the police inquest actually. So if the suspicion regarding how the person has died, then the body will be subjected to a post-mortem examination. So this post-mortem examination is done by an authorized person. So this can be a government person or a private person. So nearest authorized person, who is an authorized person? I would be an authorized person because I am a forensic expert working in a mortuary. So I would be an authorized person. So inquest would be forwarded to me along with a requisition for autopsy, and with that I will do the post-mortem, and I will prepare a post-mortem report. After post-mortem, I will give the body back to the investigating officer, and then only the investigating officer will hand it over to the relatives, who will then cremate the body. So this is the entire sequence of events which is involved in police inquest. Any doubts, please ask me then and there. I can clarify. You don't have to wait for me to finish the slide. Okay. So next. So this is the first question which has come up. So please read the question and tell me what is the probable answer. So after post-mortem, the body should be handed over to whom? Yes, students, please answer. You can unmute your mic and answer.
To the investigating officer.
Yes, that would be the correct answer. It will be the investigating officer. So whenever you answer an MCQ, I would always suggest you to not only to identify the correct answer, but also to rule out the other wrong answers. So this will make your answers more sure, and this is the correct way of answering the MCQ. The other options here are magistrate inquest. No, only in magistrate inquest, the body is handed over to the magistrate. Then patient or relatives, no. Directly after post-mortem, we do not issue it to the relatives. See, it is like custody, okay? So custody is transferred from the police to the autopsy doctor, and then from the autopsy doctor, the custody goes back to the police, okay? So person who can seize the custody is the investigating officer, that is the police himself. So he is the one who gives the body to the patient or relatives. So local inspector, no, and coroner is not followed in India anymore, okay? So body is handed over to the investigating officer. Okay. So next is magistrate inquest. This is followed in India. Where is the place of practice? So entire India, again, magistrate inquest is done. But magistrate inquest requires specific circumstances in which the magistrate inquest will be ordered. Okay. So what are the special circumstances in which a magistrate inquest is done? So number one is exhumation. Exhumation means digging up of an already buried body. Okay, this is something called a second autopsy, meaning first time autopsy can be done, the body may be buried, then it gets dug up again, and then a second autopsy can be done on it. Or first time the autopsy may not be done. This is common in very common in India. So without doing the autopsy, especially in village sites, if you see, they don't have that much knowledge about the law. Okay, they don't have knowledge, or they don't inform the police. If a person dies, a person has hanged himself, they straight away cremate the body. They either bury the body or cremate. If you cremate or if you burn the body, you cannot you cannot dig it out. But if you bury the body, second investigation can come up and you can bring the body out. So that is called out as an exhumation. So when exhumation is being done, the magistrate will be heading that particular inquest. Okay. Next is dowry death. You and me, both of us know what is the importance of dowry death. So in dowry death, suspected dowry death cases, straight away, the police will not conduct the inquest. The nearest magistrate will conduct the inquest. Then custodial deaths. Why I say custodial deaths? These are places of legal or judicial custody. What are those? Psychiatric hospital is one, police station is one, prison is one. So wherever a judicial custody exists and death occurs in the judicial custody, so all those places magistrate inquest will be done. So just to list it out, psychiatric hospital death is one. So death in police firing, police interrogation, death in the prison or police custody. So how to remember these conditions? Okay. So exhumation and dowry death are the two specific conditions which are to be remembered.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please tell me.
Sir, we are still on that question slide. We cannot see your current slide.
Can you see the slide now?
Yes, sir.
You can see?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Inquest?
Yes, sir. Now.
I can continue?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll just, for the purpose of recap, I will just review that. So exhumation and dowry death are two special circumstances which are unique in the sense, exhumation is one place where police can falter. Okay, meaning there could be suspicion regarding the police. Dowry death also, there is fault, there can be a fault in the police where, they could be collaborating with the accused, or they could be collaborating with the people who have committed the dowry death. So wherever police is in question, see, for example, I will show you in death in police firing and interrogation. See, police themselves are involved in this case. So police themselves doing an inquest makes no brainer. Okay, police themselves, they themselves are in question, and they themselves doing the inquest is absolutely conflict of interest. So wherever police is in question, there the magistrate will come up. Which form of magistrates will do this? Okay, so magistrate can be divided into two. So one is called as an executive magistrate. Okay. So one form of magistrates are called executive magistrates, and the other form is called as judicial. Okay. So executive magistrates are people who are in the revenue department. Okay. So you understand what a revenue department is, like collector, sub-collector, those are all magistrates. So they have executive powers. They usually deal with land reforms, land taxes, and other things. Judicial magistrates are found in the court. Okay, so there'll be first class, second class, executive, chief executive magistrates. So these are all judicial magistrates. So usually judicial magistrates are the one who will head this magistrate inquest. Okay, the procedure will be same as that of police inquest, except that the investigating officer here is the magistrate himself, and he does not go and inquire with the punchers. He gets the information directly from the police. Okay, so what is the difference between police inquest and magistrate inquest? So investigating officer in police inquest is the police officer, in magistrate inquest it is the executive magistrate. Types of cases: in all unnatural deaths, police inquest is done, whereas in special cases, magistrate inquest is done. Warrant, okay, this is another thing which I did not mention there. So warrant is issued only in the case of magistrate himself. See, magistrates are the people who can issue the warrant. So what warrant am I talking about here? It is usually the arrest warrant. Okay. So if a person has to be arrested, the warrant has to come from the magistrate himself. So if police is doing the inquest, police cannot issue the warrant. Police are the people who execute that warrant, meaning police will go and arrest that particular person. Okay. So warrants are not issued in a police inquest, they are issued in case of magistrate inquest. Punishment and fine. Police have no jurisdiction in imposing punishment or fine. They can only make arrests. Okay. Magistrate can impose both punishment as well as fine. Exhumation is exclusively to magistrate, I've already told. Value of the inquest. Inquest is inferior when it comes to police inquest, but in case of magistrate inquest, since he's a legal person, the inquest has more value, therefore it is considered to be superior. So sections are important, so that is why I'm underlining these two. Section 174 CRPC is police inquest and section 176 CRPC is the magistrate inquest. Okay. So this is the next question. Death occurring in lockup, investigation is held by. Yes, answer please.
Magistrate.
Okay, so this is very easy. I just listed out the condition. It is straightforward by the magistrate himself. So police superintendent, not possible. Panchayat officer, not at all possible. District attorney, not possible. These are legal people. They have different powers. So the only person here authorized to do the inquest will be the magistrate. Okay. Next question. In India, inquest is held by magistrate in all except. Okay, answer please. Are you able to see the question?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No?
No, sir. Read option.
Now, sir.
Yeah. I think there's a problem with
Option 3.
option.
Third option.
Third option. Yeah. So that will be the correct answer. Even in murder cases, so this is where people generally get confused. So they'll think murder is a big crime. No. So the conditions where magistrate inquest is done is predefined. It is defined in 176 of the CRPC. Anything outside 176 CRPC, all that is done by the police. So here exhumation, dowry death, and death of person in police custody, these are clear indications where magistrate inquest is done. The only place which is not listed there will be the murder cases. Okay. So next, a brief introduction about coroner's inquest. I don't know why they keep asking this question, but frequently I found questions regarding coroner's inquest. Why I'm saying that? Because it was abolished in 1999. The last place to conduct coroner's inquest was in Bombay. Okay. Now it is called Mumbai.
Dr. Tejas,
Yes, madam.
there is some problem in slide Tejas. Like students, same problem you are all also viewing.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Slide is not clear, something like that.
Okay. Can I switch over to the laptop? Will that be okay? Hello?
Just a second. Here is sir.
Laptop tarla madam. Laptop alla hakolla.
Laptop al haki sir. Huh.
Okay, then I have to disconnect this. I'll get back, madam. Yeah. No, I'll come back, madam. I'll come back. Yeah.
Yes sir. All of you just be online.
Yeah, I'll get the laptop. పవర్ కేబుల్ కొంచెం తెచ్చి కనెక్షన్. Ah, 2 minutes, madam. I'm switching on the laptop.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Tejas. ಏನಾಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರಲ್ವಾ ಇಮೇಲ್ ಏನಂತ
ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಒಂದು ಹುಡುಗಿ ಹೇಳಿದಾರೆ ಯಾರೋ ನಿಮ್ದು ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಬರ್ತಿದ್ದು ಕ್ಯಾಲೆಂಡರ್ ಬರ್ತಿದೆ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಉಂಟು ಅಂತ 9:30 ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ 10:00 ಹಂಗೆ ಬರ್ತೀವಿ 10ಕ್ಕೆ ಬರ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ
ಎಲ್ಲ ಮುಂಚೆ ಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಮೇಲ್ಚಿನ್ ಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು
ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಕಳ್ಸಿದ್ದೀನಿ
ಈ ವಾಟ್ಸಪ್ ಗ್ರೂಪ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹಾಕಿ ಹಲೋ ತೇಜಸ್ ಹಲೋ ತೇಜಸ್
Students, kindly cooperate and wait till sir uses his computer.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Present.
Yes, sir.
Present.
Sir,
Start the
there's
presentation.
problem with the laptop. I'll continue in the tab only. No problem. Yes, sir. If the screen gets stuck, you please tell me, sir. I will try to fix it. Yeah. Okay. So can you see the slide, sir?
No. Slides are still a small window, sir. Okay, right now we can see, sir.
You can see now?
Yes.
Continue?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. Some technical issue. Okay. So coroner's inquest was covered under the Coroner's Act of 1871. It was abolished in 1999 and it was last done in Bombay. So who was a coroner? So coroner was qualified in law. He is a legal person. It could be an advocate, it could be a magistrate. At that point of time, a person was appointed as a designation as coroner. Okay. So usually he was a first class judicial magistrate. Okay. Where all coroner's investigation could be done. So first is sudden death. It could be done in suicide, homicide, infanticide, death by accidents, poisoning, drug mishaps or machinery, traffic deaths, death under general anesthesia, custody deaths, and so forth. Okay. So what could a coroner do actually? He could summon the doctor, he could order exhumation, he could issue warrants in non-cognizable offense. I will tell what is cognizable, non-cognizable later. So for now, just remember that coroner could issue warrants in the case of non-cognizable offense. Okay. So coroner's court versus magistrate court. So coroner's court is usually a court of inquiry with an E. Please read this inquiry. Is the slide visible?
Yes, sir.
Hearing
Okay.
coroner's inquest.
Okay.
Same slide. No change in the slide, sir.
Not changed. Okay. So in coroner's court is a court of inquiry, whereas magistrate court is a court of trial. Okay. So inquiry ends with findings but no conviction in the case of coroner's court. Whereas in magistrate court, trial ends either with conviction or acquittal of the accused. Okay. In coroner's court, accused need not be present. See, this is a major important point. The accused need not be present in the case of coroner's court whenever the court is going on. Whereas in magistrate court, the accused must be present. Please understand, this is called something called as principles of natural justice, wherein the entire proceedings of the court must take place in front of the accused. Okay. Coroner views the dead body.
Sir, there is no change in the slide.
There's no change?
Coroner's Inquest, Coroner's Act 1890.
Okay.
Yeah, here now you came, sir.
Okay. So I don't know why that is occurring actually. Not able to.
It became blurred.
Now, okay.
Yes, sir. There is a problem with this iPad always.
Oh. Now it's visible.
Question you are now.
Now I went back to this previous slide. Coroner's court versus
No,
magistrate
which
court.
slide you are on, sir? You are in which slide? I don't know, sir. Coroner's court I can see. Magistrate court I can see.
Now you can see coroner's court versus magistrate court. The differences
Yeah,
are listed out. Yeah. Okay. Everyone is able to see this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. So in coroner's court, the coroner views the dead body and holds the inquest. Okay. Whereas in magistrate court, the magistrate does not go and see the dead body or hold the inquest. It is done by the police generally. Coroner cannot punish the accused except when guilty of contempt of court done within the premises of the court. Okay. So coroner's court, the coroner's jurisdiction is within the court premises itself, not outside. Whereas in magistrate court, the magistrate can punish for offense done within or outside the court as well. Okay. And coroner appoints deputy during his illness. Okay. This was also important thing. So he could replace someone, he could say someone else is in charge of the coroner's court when he is ill or when he is not able to discharge his duties. Whereas in magistrate court, there is no such power to the magistrate. Coroner is assisted by members of the jury. Okay. So he has, you have seen the movies, you would have seen some common people will be appointed as jury for a particular trial, and the judge will be sitting and he will ask the jury to make a decision and get back to them. Okay.
Sir, if you point with something, we'll come to know which slide you are actually.
Okay.
Because otherwise we may lose a track of the slide also.
Okay. 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 So, okay, here we are. So, coroner is assisted by members of the jury, whereas the magistrate has no such thing. There is not assisted by the jury. The magistrate himself takes the decision. Okay. So, this question you must be able to see answer. I've already displayed. Are you able to see the question?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So in coroner's inquest, magistrate of the area has to be informed. No, there's no magistrate there. He cannot order exhumation. Yes, he can order exhumation. He can summon the doctor to give evidence. Yes, this is correct. Cannot issue warrant in non-cognizable offense. No, he can allow and he can execute warrants in the case of non-cognizable offense. Okay. So next we move to the medical examiner system. Okay. Where, who and how I've already indicated. It is done in the USA. The medical person himself, so I've indicated a doctor here. So the medical person himself goes to the scene of crime. He orders the investigation, he collects the evidences, he does the post-mortem, and then this is presented to the court. Okay. So this is considered to be the best form of investigative system in the world. Okay. So next, just a brief overview of what type of cases exist and what kind of offenses exist in India. So if you see what kind of cases are registered in India, so the first kind is a criminal case. Everyone knows this. So criminal case is the most common case which is registered. But even more common than criminal cases are the civil cases. So land disputes are the maximum number of cases listed in the civil jurisdiction. Okay, and then there are something called as warrant cases and summons cases. So what are these? So if you see, I'm sorry, I was just searching for the pointer. So if you see the warrant, so if in warrant cases, what happens is that the punishment should be more than 2 years. So whatever offenses are listed under warrant cases, the punishment usually will be more than 2 years. So if, 2 years of imprisonment. So if the punishment is less than 2 years of imprisonment, it is usually termed as summons. I'm sorry, let's keep shifting. Okay. So the offenses are usually termed as summons cases. Okay. And the offenses are usually categorized into cognizable and non-cognizable offenses. So just for explanation's sake, if you want to distinguish between what is cognizable and non-cognizable. So cognizable means that the offense is of a serious nature. Just to give a few examples, murder, dowry death, and rape, these are called as cognizable offenses. Non-cognizable offenses, example would be a simple injury occurring from a not a dangerous weapon. Okay. How to distinguish and what are the difference between the two? In cognizable offenses, the police officer can arrest the accused without waiting for a warrant. This is very important. So he need not wait for the warrant from the nearest magistrate. He can straightforward go and arrest the accused. Whereas in non-cognizable offense, the arrest has to be made only with the warrant which is obtained from the magistrate. Okay. So next, we'll move to the courts in India. Okay. So is this visible, the slide?
No, sir.
No?
Changes, sir. Not at all.
Not yet?
No. Yes.
Okay. So courts in India are of two types. One is the criminal courts and next is the civil courts. Okay. So what we are interested is criminal courts. So hierarchy of courts are as follows. So the highest tribunal in India is the Supreme Court. So why we say the highest tribunal? Because this is a constitutional court, meaning the Constitution of India itself has a provision for this court to exist. Okay. So what is the function of this Supreme Court? It oversees all the other courts, and whatever the decision is given by the Supreme Court, it is binding on all the lower courts. Okay, number one. Number two, it will not take up cases directly, meaning it is an appellate court, meaning whatever cases are held and whatever cases are discussed in the lower courts, if there is an appeal in those courts, then only it will go to the Supreme Court, except, okay, what is the exception? There are exceptions where cases are directly taken up in the Supreme Court. The first one is violation of fundamental rights. So if there is a violation of your fundamental right, that case can directly be argued in the Supreme Court. Okay. So under the Supreme Court will be the High Court. Okay. Supreme Court is located at the capital of the nation, that is in New Delhi, whereas High Court will be usually at the capital of the state. Okay. There is a High Court which is in Northeast India, which is not at the capital of the state. It is in the Assam High Court, where it is the 2-3 states are combined and a High Court is assigned in the Northeast India. That is the one exception where High Court is not situated in the state capital. Okay. So what is the power of state capital High Court? So it supersedes all the courts below it. Whatever decision it passes will be binding to all other courts below it. And these two courts can pass any sentence authorized by the law, including death sentence. Okay. So whatever courts which come below these courts, they cannot directly pass the death sentence. Okay. So underneath the High Court, we have the Sessions Court, the Magistrate Court, and Special Courts. Sessions Courts are further divided into Additional and Assistant Sessions Court. Okay. We will see some of them in the next slide. Okay. So are you able to see this?
Yes, sir. Next slide is slim.
Okay. So Supreme Court is located in New Delhi. It can pass any sentence authorized by the law. High Court is usually in the state capital, And again, it can pass any sentence authorized by the law. So sessions court. So this is usually at the district. So district sessions courts, that is what it is called. What is the speciality of this? So usually the judicial magistrate will be here, and it can give any sentence authorized by the law except death sentence, which has to be confirmed from the high court. Okay. So just to give you a brief introduction about magistrates, I've already explained this. One form of magistrate will be the judicial magistrate, who will be in the courtroom, and the other form of magistrate will be the executive magistrate. So judicial magistrates can be divided into two. One is called as a metropolitan magistrate, or the chief judicial magistrate, and the non-metropolitan magistrates. So executive magistrates are usually in the district or subdivisional and the special judicial executive magistrates. Okay. So this is very important. So this usually they twist it and they keep asking in different forms. So the chief judicial magistrate has the power to give imprisonment to a maximum of 7 years, but fine can be unlimited. Okay. The first class judicial magistrate has the power to issue imprisonment up to 3 years and a maximum fine of 10,000 rupees. Second class judicial magistrate is up to 1 year and fine is up to 5,000 rupees. Please remember, there is no third class judicial magistrate. The word itself is derogatory. Usually they insert it into an MCQ, people get confused. So this is the way the magisterial power is depicted. Okay. So this was, I'm sorry. So this slide is visible. So the chief judicial magistrate is up to 7 years only. Okay. So question is visible. Question is visible.
Yes, we visible, sir.
Okay. So the first class judicial magistrate can award imprisonment for a maximum period of dash years. Just now I have discussed. Answer please.
First.
3 years.
3 years. Okay. So that will be the answer. Which of the following is not true? Please read this slowly.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Changed? Slide?
Yes, changed.
Okay. An additional sessions judge can award any punishment authorized by the law. An assistant sessions judge can award imprisonment for a term exceeding 10 years. Death sentence passed by an additional judge has to be confirmed by the High Court. An assistant session judge cannot pass a death sentence. So the question is asking which of them is not true. So any possible answer? Any answer? Anything? Okay, let me break down the question. Okay. So additional sessions judge, as the name itself indicates, this judge is an additional judge, but he is a sessions judge. So in the previous slide, I told that sessions judge can pass any punishment authorized by the law. Okay. So next, what they say is assistant sessions judge. So this I have not introduced yet. So I will give the answer and then introduce the assistant sessions judge. So what does the assistant sessions court or sessions judge do? So assistant sessions court, there is no death penalty. He cannot issue a death sentence or an imprisonment which may be more than 10 years. So he can issue an imprisonment up to 10 years only. This is under section 28 of the CRPC. So this is not the correct option. Any doubts in this, please ask me, I can clarify. Okay. So all other statements are true except for the second statement. That will be the answer. Can I go to the next question? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this we will enter the first special court. Okay. So what is this? This is the Juvenile, you are able to see this? Juvenile Justice Act. Okay. So the entire name of the act is Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children's Act of 2000. Okay. So who is a juvenile? A person who is below 18 years of age is considered as a juvenile. Okay. And a person, if a person below 18 years, so the question can be, sir, what about 1 year? What about 2 years? They can also commit acts. Now the next question will be what type of acts they can commit, what illegal things they can commit. So there is a lower limit also. So the lower limit is not defined by the law, but it depends from case to case. Okay, so any person less than 18 years who has done some kind of a wrongdoing, so that person will be taken under the juvenile code, and the case will be held and prosecuted in the juvenile court. And all those persons below 18 years who have done a wrongful act or an offense, they are called juveniles in conflict with the law. Okay, they are called as juveniles in conflict with the law. And there is a special board which is called as the Juvenile Justice Board. So what is this? So this board encompasses first thing of a judicial person. What is that? He is a first class woman judicial magistrate. Please understand this. First class woman judicial magistrate heads the judicial court. So along with that woman, there will be two other people, two other social workers. One of them will be a woman. Okay. So this will be the Juvenile Justice Board. So they will oversee the juvenile court and what type of sentences are passed. It is not death sentence, it is not imprisonment. The juveniles are not imprisoned into the prison. So what type of orders they are passed? The orders are passed to admit the juveniles into special schools. They are called as reformatory schools. Okay, reformatory school. So they are called as reformatory schools. Earlier they were called as Borstal. Okay. Earlier the name for reformatory schools was Borstal, B-O-R-S-T-A-L. Okay. So they are other uncommon name was remand room or remand home. So that was another name for that. Okay, so that was used to scare children also. If you do something naughty, I'll send you to remand home. So that was also commonly being used. Now all those terms are removed. The only thing which is allowed is reformatory school. So in reformatory school, it is a school actually, and they'll be allowed to do some reformatory works like gardening or learning or daily activities for the juveniles to be there. And another important thing is the person is kept in the juvenile home only till 18 years. After 18 years, you have to let the person go. He cannot be transferred to an adult prison as soon as he turns 18 years. This is most important for a juvenile act. Okay. So next we move into court procedures in criminal courts. Okay. So what are the different procedures I have just listed here? So first is attendance in court, next comes summons, next comes warrant, conduct money, oath taking and recording of evidence. We will take each one singly at a time. Okay. So first thing what I would like to discuss here is the term summons or subpoena. Both mean the same. Summons is an Indian term, subpoena is from outside India, usually from the UK courts. So what does this mean? So if you see this word, we can split this into two, sub and pena. Sub means under. Okay. Sub means under. Okay. And pena means penalty or punishment. Okay. So subpoena, if you split that word, it means that under penalty. So what is that? It's a document issued by the court compelling the attendance of a witness in a court of law under penalty on a particular day and time and place for the purpose of giving evidence. Okay. Just to make things easy for you, what it means, it's a document, it's a piece of paper which comes from the court. It has a particular date, it has a particular time, and it has a particular place. So what is that for? The person who receives that summon, he has to go to the court and give the evidence. And what is most important is it is under penalty, meaning if you don't go, there is a penalty on you. You can be punished. Okay, so that is the meaning of summons or subpoena. So there are two forms of summons or subpoena. One form is called as subpoena ad testificandum. Okay. Subpoena ad testificandum. So these are Latin words. Please oblige with me. So one form of summons is called as subpoena ad testificandum. Another form is called as summons deus tecum. Okay, so what are these two? So summons ad testificandum, if you take this, so if you take summons ad testificandum, what does this mean? The person has to come and testify, meaning he has to come to the court and he has to give the evidence. But if you see the other thing, deus tecum, this means that he has to bring whatever documents necessary for the purpose of giving evidence. And those documents are generally, they are indicated in the subpoena itself. Okay, the subpoena itself will contain that you have to come and you have to bring these particular documents to the court for the purpose of giving evidence. Okay, I hope you have understood the two. Okay, so what is the procedure for serving the summons? So summons is usually served by number one, the police. Okay, police are usually the people who get the summons, or it can be done by an officer of the court. So other than the judge, there are so many other people. The clerk can be there, the other people who are working in the court. There is something called court police also. Police who are guarding the court, they can also issue the summons. Okay, these days summons are being issued via WhatsApp also. Because of the corona period, they have modified the system, and summons, doctors are getting summons in WhatsApp also. That has also become legal. Okay, so how is it issued? So the summons will be 2 sheets of paper, one original and one duplicate. Okay, so both will contain the seal of the court and the signature of the judge who is issuing the summons. Okay, on receiving the summons, the particular individual has to countersign on the duplicate summons and give it back to the police, and the original is retained along with the person who is summoned. Okay, so the police will then take the duplicate and issue it into the court. That becomes as a proof of receipt that you have received the summons. Okay, so what happens when there is absence, meaning you are not present or you are not there at the residence? In this case, if it's a government institution, whoever is heading your department or whoever is your senior, that person can receive the summons and he has to serve the summons to you. If it's a private place, then in your absence, the summon can be stuck on the door also. So if your house is there, they located your house, they can stick the summons onto your door and consider the summons to be served on the particular individual. So what are the rules of summons? Okay, so why this is important? So summons can be issued from criminal court, from civil court, which take hierarchy. You must be knowing this. It is always criminal over the civil. So you get 2 different summons. One is from a criminal court and one is from a civil court. The criminal court will take priority. Next, if 2 civil courts are issuing summons, if you get it on 2 different dates, then the earlier court will get the priority over the next court. Okay, so and in court also, if the chief judicial magistrate court is giving and the first class judicial magistrate court is giving summons and both are at the same day, then the chief judicial court is the one you have to attend first, and you have to inform the first class judicial magistrate court regarding the same, that I have received 2 summons on the same day, and as per hierarchy I am going to the chief magistrate court at that particular time. Okay, if 2 courts of the same cadre are issuing, meaning first class judicial magistrate court, 2 summons you have got from 2 different courts, but they are at the same time, and whichever you received first, you're going to go to that particular courtroom. Okay, not attending court after receiving summons is considered to be contempt of court. Okay, you can be punished. What happens? Many a times these government officials, they don't attend in spite of receiving the summons. So the court will again issue summons for 3 consecutive times. In 3 consecutive times also, if you don't come to the court has the power to issue warrant, arrest warrant. It can issue an arrest warrant wherein the police will come, they will arrest the individual and produce him in the courtroom. Okay, so this is the next question. So answer, subpoena is a Are you able to see the slide?
Hello?
Fourth
option. Okay, why 4th option? Please read the options correctly. Subpoena could be a legal document, medical legal document, medical report, or report of evidence. See, it cannot be a report of evidence. Why? Because as if you see the definition of subpoena itself, it says it's a document compelling you to give witness. Okay, so it will not be report of evidence. It is not a medical report because judge is issuing it. It is coming from the court. It is again not a medical legal document because there is no doctor there. Only court is giving. So it becomes a legal document. Okay, any doubts in this? Can I go to the next one? Any doubts?
No, sir.
Okay. So next thing will be what is a warrant and what is conduct money. So first I will deal with conduct money. This is very easy to understand. You're able to see this? Okay. So conduct money is a fee which is issued by the court to meet the expenses of giving evidence in court of law. Meaning it is only done in civil courts. Please understand this. It is only done in civil cases wherein the court issues some fee to meet the expenses for giving the evidence in the court of law. So the person incurs some expenses like whether it could be traveling or whether it could be getting bus or auto or whatever. So whatever expenses he or she incurs in coming to the court and giving the evidence, to mitigate that, the court issues some particular fee that is called as a conduct money. So this is usually done in all civil cases, but in criminal cases, conduct money is not given. Please understand this. Why? Because in criminal case, the doctor or whoever is there is duty bound, is bound by law. It is considered his legal responsibility to go and give evidence in the interest of justice. Okay. So from that point of view, conduct money is not given, but daily allowance and conveyance allowance is given in criminal courts as per the state laws. So every state has different laws. So based on that, the conveyance and the daily allowance will be paid. Whereas warrant is straightforward arrest. Okay. So warrant are of three different types. So one is called as an arrest warrant, and it could be of bailable and non-bailable variety. Next is called as a bench warrant, which means producing the particular person in front of the court. And this you would have heard, this is very common in movies also you would have seen, it is called a search warrant. Okay. So arrest warrant can be bailable or non-bailable. See, you have to understand this. What does this mean? So when it's a bailable arrest warrant, meaning the police cannot hold that particular person, or the police cannot hold the arrested person in the police station for long. Once the bail is executed, the police are duty bound to let go of that person. Okay. Whereas in non-bailable offenses, the police can arrest the person and bail cannot be done in the police station. So the police will arrest the person and the person is presented in front of the magistrate within 24 hours and magistrate can then give the bail. Okay. So essentially in both places bail will be issued, but where it will be issued? In bailable offenses, it is done in the police station itself, whereas in non-bailable offenses, only the judicial magistrate, after seeing the case, can fix a bail for that particular case. Okay. So next we are going into procedure for recording evidence. Okay. So in the procedure for recording of evidence, the first thing you do is the oath taking. So oath everyone would have seen in the movies, I believe, because this is very common and this is beautifully done in the movies. But in reality, it is not like that. I myself have gone to courts, and what they usually do there is one plank is already put up in the witness box. The plank will contain words, and you just have to read from the word. No Bhagavad Gita will be kept there. This is the misnomer. Okay, no Bhagavad Gita, Quran, or anything will be given, and you have to place your hand and do that. In movies, they do that. Yes, in movies you would have seen that they bring a book of your own religion, and you have to keep your hand on that book and say, "In the name of God, I say that I will say only the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth." That will be the usual wordings which are present there. But what happens if he is an atheist? He does not believe in God. Then he does not say in the name of God. He just affirms. I solemnly affirm on my consciousness that I will tell the whole truth. That will be the oath which is given. Okay. What is the importance of oath? Only when oath is administered, the court believes that the witness is duty bound to tell the truth. Okay. So please understand this. If oath is not administered, then the evidence is not recorded. That's it. Okay, the witness can be sent back, but there is no law or things to enforce this oath. Okay, the witness can refuse the oath, but if the witness refuses the oath, then the witness is not the testimony given by the witness is not recorded. That's about it. But there is no force to administer the particular oath. It has to be done by free will. That is the importance. Okay. So which of the following is true about oath? Okay. Answer. So options are not compulsory, compulsory and binds the witness for evidence given, holds witness responsible for the consequences of the evidence, witness is liable for prosecution if he does not take oath. Answer?
Not compulsory.
You feel the last one? Fourth option?
This is first option.
First option, you feel this. Okay. Now, if you see, the answer is actually, I'll display the answer. It is 2. Why? Oath is compulsory. Why? Because the witness has come for giving the testimony. Okay? The witness has come for purpose of giving the evidence. If he's come for the purpose of giving evidence, without taking oath, the evidence will not be collected or the testimony will not be recorded. So the moment the witness walks into the witness box, it is compulsory on that witness to take the oath. Without oath, nothing will go forward. So the first option will be incorrect. Okay. Let's see the third option, holds witness responsible for the consequences of the evidence. No, the court is responsible for whatever comes from the evidence given by the witness. Okay, so this is also not the option. Witness is liable for prosecution if he does not take oath. So I already told you there is no punishment. There is no force, there is no law which can force the person to take oath. Okay, so this will be the right option. It is compulsory and binds the witness for giving the evidence. That's saying that whatever the witness says is the truth. Okay, I hope everyone has understood this. Go to the next question. So this is how the evidence is recorded. Okay, so first will be the oath. Next comes examination in chief. Then comes cross-examination. Then comes re-examination, and then finally questions by the court. Okay, so oath I have already dealt with. Okay, so in brief, I will explain what is examination in chief. Okay, so if you're looking at examination in chief, so first the oath will be administered, then we go to the examination in chief. So this is done by the lawyer who has called the person to the court. Meaning, if I get someone, then whichever lawyer, it could be the prosecutor, it could be the defense lawyer, whoever has summoned me to the court, that person will take the examination chief. What is the objective of examination chief? It is to elicit all the facts or events pertaining to that particular event. Okay. So if I go to court, whatever purpose I've been called for example, I witnessed a murder, I witnessed an accident. So the examination in chief focuses on eliciting all the facts which are bound to that particular incident. So where it occurred, how it occurred, where were you, what did you see? So these are the questions which are asked in examination in chief. The most important thing about examination in chief is that the questions which are asked are open-ended questions. Okay, just to give you an example, the examination in chief question will be that, what did you see? This is an open-ended question. So each person can give different answer. It is more of a description. So what I see and what you see are different. I have to describe it. So whatever I saw that vehicle, I saw that person being stabbed, I saw that vehicle being run over, I saw this person was like lying down, that person was standing up. So it's more of a descriptive answer. Okay. So examination in chief is more of a descriptive answers. What is not allowed here? Leading questions are not allowed here. I will tell you what a leading question is when we go to cross-examination. Okay. So leading questions are not allowed in examination in chief. Okay. So what are leading questions? So leading questions are those questions which have an inbuilt answer in them. Inbuilt. Please don't understand this as only yes or no questions. Okay. It could be right or wrong questions. It could be any question where the answer is within the question. Okay. So just to give you an example, if the lawyer asks a question like, doctor, please tell me, were you present at this particular time? Okay, so the question is something like, doctor, did you do the autopsy at this particular time? So he says the time in the end. So the answer now is contained within the question. Why? Because the answer has two possibilities and both the possibilities are directly related to the question. It could be yes or it could be no. Okay, so in simple terms, this could be yes or no question. So there is no room for a description. That becomes a leading questions. Okay, so leading questions are not allowed in examination in chief except when the witness is hostile. Except when the witness is hostile. So what is a hostile witness then? Okay, hostile witness is a one who, due to a particular motive, the motive can be either bribery or intimidation, is giving a false evidence or untrue evidence or covers a part of the truth or giving totally different evidence contrary to the lawyer who has called him. Okay, so for example, I have witnessed a murder. Okay, I tell the police that I witnessed the murder, I have given them the details of the murder, but I go to the courtroom because of some pressure, someone offered me a bribe or someone is intimidating me, some police called me and threatened me, some gunda called me and threatened me. I go to the witness box, I'm summoned in the court, I go to the courtroom, and when the lawyer asks me, I say, no, I did not witness, or I don't know, or I say I can't describe. So I would be termed as a hostile witness. So the witness is answering in such a way that it is contrary to the theory which is put forward by the party which has called him. Okay, it could be the defense or the public prosecutor. So I'm going against to their concept or against to their theory. Okay. So what is perjury then? Perjury will be a willful or voluntary giving of a false evidence. So person has taken oath and is giving false evidence. So these two are usually mixed up by students. See, hostile witness is one form of perjury. Please understand this. So perjury is a larger subset and hostile witness is a part of that subset. So if a hostile witness's lies can be proved in the court of law, it becomes perjury. In simple words. Okay. So the lawyer knows that the witness is lying. But if it can be proved in court of law that the witness is lying, then it becomes perjury. So perjury is punishable. Perjury is defined under 191 of the IPC and it is punished with 7 years of prison. That is described under 193 of the IPC. So if a witness is hostile, so in examination chief itself, the party who has called the witness, that particular party will request the judge. That lawyer will request the judge saying that, Your Honor, this witness is hostile and please consider this witness as hostile. And then the judge will declare that, yes, this witness is hostile, you can proceed further. So what is the advantage of that? Now the party who has summoned in, that party can start asking leading questions. Okay, so that becomes more difficult to lie. When the answer is inbuilt into the question itself, then it becomes very difficult to lie. Okay. So yes, answer for this question. Leading questions are not permitted in. The options are cross-examination, examination in chief, questions by the judge, or re-examination.
Option 2.
Option 2. Yes. There is option 4 also. Re-examination is again done by the same party. So the order of evidence recording is, first is oath, examination in chief, cross-examination, re-examination, and questions by the judge. So examination in chief and re-examination are done by the party who calls the particular witness to the courtroom. Okay. And then cross-examination is done by the opposite lawyer. So in both cross and re-examination, if the witness, leading questions are not allowed. But if the witness is termed hostile, then in both these places, the leading questions can be allowed. So that is the rider there. Okay. So next question. Options are a little bit changed. So leading question can be asked in option 1, cross-examination, option 2, examination chief of hostile witnesses, option 3, both of the above, option 4, none of the above. Yes, answer?
Second.
Second? Yes, second is also correct. But look at option 3. It says cross-examination and examination in chief. So here, why they get confused is the only place where leading questions are allowed is usually this one, cross-examination. Okay? But if the witness is turned hostile, then in examination in chief also it will be allowed. Therefore, the best option here will be option 3. Okay. Next, before that, so I will tell you a little bit about cross-examination. So we have understood what is oath, we have understood what is examination in chief, then comes cross-examination. So cross-examination is done by opposite party to discredit the evidence, to weaken the evidence, to introduce doubts into the evidence, to introduce new facts, to bring out old facts, to somehow try to weaken that particular case. Okay, it could be character assassination, it could be personal attacks. So, and that is the place where leading questions are allowed. Okay. So, cross-examination is always intended to somehow subdue whatever strong points or whatever emphasis has been laid on some particular points. Okay, just to make you understand. So, if you are asking leading questions, let us say, how cross-examination is done for a doctor, just so to speak. Okay, so the questions will not be pertaining to the matter which is being heard in the court at all. It may be something like, doctor, where have you done your MBBS? Where have you done your MD degree? The postmortem report you have not written clearly. This is not done by you. It would be dependent on the character. So if they discredit the doctor, then whatever evidence given by the doctor, that will also be weakened in the courtroom. So this is the usual purview of the cross-examination. And another thing is there is no time interval for cross-examination. It can be in hours, it can be in days. It is dependent on the court. So it can go on for days also. In Rajiv Gandhi assassination, the cross-examination went on for 3 months, 90 days. Okay, so that is the biggest cross-examination ever done in India so far. Okay. Next, we'll move to evidence. Evidence means and includes all statements made or documents produced which the court permits or requires to be made in relation to the matter of fact under inquiry. So this basically means all types of evidentiary materials which can be used to assess that particular case. Very simply put. Okay, whatever, it can be a document, it can be written, it may not be written. All these evidences which are used to judge that matter of fact which is there in the court. So whether that matter is true, whether that matter is false, whatever supports this becomes an evidence. So what are the different types of evidence? There are two main types. One is oral and one is a documentary evidence. Oral evidence can be direct, indirect, or hearsay. So what are these? So if you see direct evidence, these are usually eyewitnesses. Okay. So for example, just to write, we'll consider A, B, C. Okay. So there are 3 different people. C has witnessed B stab A with a knife. So let me repeat that. Person C has seen person B stab person A with a knife. Okay. Here, C giving evidence will become a direct evidence. Okay. Now, what is indirect evidence? Indirect evidence is B has stabbed A. Therefore, the blood of A is found on the clothes of B. Okay. So these are facts or circumstances. So it is also called as circumstantial evidence. Okay. Indirect or circumstantial evidence. Why? Because the blood stains found on B, which belongs to that of A, acts as a indirect evidence. Okay. Now, what is hearsay evidence then? So C goes to another friend D and tells him that B has stabbed A, and D is now giving evidence. That becomes a hearsay evidence. Okay. So the best evidence here is always the direct evidence. Okay. Hearsay is usually disregarded by the courtroom because it is made on uncertain observations, meaning it is heard. It is hearsay. It is heard by someone else. This person has not directly witnessed it, but is heard from someone who has witnessed it. That becomes a hearsay evidence. Okay, the best form of evidence is always the direct one. When it comes to documentary evidences, there are different varieties. So here it could be medical certificates, it could be medical legal certificates, or a dying declaration that we'll see in detail. Okay, so this is done. So documentary evidences can be medical. So medical certificates are those certificates which are issued by the doctor. So what are these? These could be illness. I'll list it out. So this could be illness related certificate, illness meaning sickness certificate, or it could be death certificate, which is called MCCD, medical certificate of cause of death. Okay, so these two are medical certificates. So if you're looking at medical reports, so these can be injury certificates, or it could be postmortem reports, okay, or sexual offense reports. So survivor of sex, if the accused or victim is examined, then it becomes a medical legal report. The main distinction between a medical certificate and a medical legal report is that medical certificate is issued directly by the doctor without any requisition. Okay, so medical certificate is issued directly by the doctor. He is duty bound to issue this without any requisition. But for medical legal reports, the requisition has to come either from the concerned legal authority. Either it can come from the police or from the magistrate. So under the requisition only, medical legal reports are prepared and they are issued. And the last form of documentary evidence is the dying deposition and the declaration, which I will discuss next. Okay. So medical legal and medical reports should be issued properly. Issuing a false certificate is both unethical and illegal. Death certificate is issued. I've gone back to the previous slide. So death certificate is issued under medical certificates only. So if a doctor is certifying death, then he issues what is called as a medical certificate of cause of death. Okay. So next we'll be moving into dying declaration. So what is dying declaration? It is a verbal or a written statement made by a person regarding cause of his death or circumstances of transactions leading to his impending death. So what does that mean? It means that a person is about to die. And how is he dying? He is experiencing an unnatural death. Unnatural death. He is about to die and he is giving information regarding the circumstances which has led to his death. Okay, so the person is experiencing unnatural death, and before he is dying, he is giving information to other people regarding the circumstances which has led to his death. Okay, so that becomes a dying declaration. So whom to give, how it is recorded is specified in that section 32 of the Indian Evidence Act. Okay, so who to give and when to give. So when is already, you know, this person is about to die, he is giving that particular dying declaration because he is suffering from an unnatural death, and he is making it at the point when he is going to die. Okay, who can record this? The first person who can record this will be the magistrate. So magistrate is the first authorized person to record the dying declaration. But most of the time, magistrate is not available. Okay. Usually the person who records this will be a doctor or the police. These two are usually the people who go and record the dying declaration. But if the situation is very grave and the person is in a very critical condition, then any other person can also record the dying declaration, but the evidentiary value goes down. Okay, so the evidentiary value of the dying declaration goes down. Any person can record dying declaration. This has the maximum evidentiary value, magistrate, but this is not possible. So next in line will be the doctor and the police. Okay, so if those two are also not available, then any other person can also record, but the evidentiary value goes down. So what is the role of the doctor in dying declaration? What is our role? Our role is to ascertain compos mentis. Compos mentis means sound mind. Compos mentis means sound mind. So what does this mean? He is the doctor has to certify that the person who is giving the dying declaration is of sound mind, meaning what? He is oriented and conscious. Okay, so this is a way to say that whatever is telling is the truth and that can be trusted on. Okay, what matter to enter? Okay, the first thing which comes to mind when entering will be whether oath should be administered or not. In dying declaration, oath is not administered. Why? It is believed that a person who is about to die will not lie regarding why he is dying. This is a belief which is accepted by the court. Therefore, oath is not administered. And information is recorded directly from the mouth of the dying person. Okay, meaning whatever he says is directly recorded without any alterations, without any undue questions. In simple language, whatever the person says is recorded onto a piece of paper in presence of witnesses. Okay, suppose the person becomes unconscious in the middle of dying declaration. Then the person who is recording the dying declaration, either the doctor or the police, he makes a account of that the person has become unconscious, and he signs and takes the signature of the witnesses, and this will be sent to the court. Okay, how to conclude and whom to send? Whom to send? I've already just told. It will be sent to the magistrate. If doctor and police are the person who are declaring the doctor and the police are the one who are recording the dying declaration, then it will be sent to the magistrate. But if the magistrate himself is recording, then he'll retain it with him. Okay. So criminal value in what is the value in criminal trial? So if you see, dying declaration has value only when the person is dead. Okay, after giving the dying declaration, if the person dies, then only there is a legal value for it. If he survives, then there is no role for dying declaration, and the person himself has to come to court, then file a case. Okay, it is practiced in India, our place. Okay, so what is dying deposition? Dying deposition in any day better than dying declaration. Why? The first thing here we say that who is recording the dying declaration? The deposition is recorded by a magistrate, whereas declaration can be recorded by anyone. Oath is required in dying deposition, not required in dying declaration. Presence of the accused or his lawyer is required in deposition, whereas not in dying declaration. Cross-examination not done in dying declaration, whereas it is done in dying deposition. Where is it followed? It's followed in India. This is not followed in India. So if you see these points, it is appearing as though that the court has come to that person who is dying. There's a magistrate, oath is administered, accused is present, cross-examination is happening. So if you see, all this has to happen in the court, and it is happening in front of the person. So it is as though that the court itself is coming to the particular person. So this particular dying declaration deposition has a better value compared to dying declaration. But the only thing is, it is not followed in India, it is followed outside. So if you see the legal value also, so this is superior. Deposition is superior. And this is an important thing. If the person or the victim survives, then dying declaration ceases to exist, whereas dying deposition is considered with full value. Okay. So admissibility of documentary evidences without oral evidence. So these are the documents which are admitted into the court without oral evidence. See, whatever happens in the court, where any piece of document which is presented in the court, that cannot be accepted by the court unless it is cross-examined. Okay, so this again follows the principles of natural justice. Whatever postmortem report I prepare, see, I prepare a very comprehensive postmortem report and I send it to court. Again, why I have to go to court? Because court will not accept the document just like that. It has to be cross-examined. Only then it becomes acceptable. But there are some documents which are directly accepted by the court. What are they? First is dying declaration and dying deposition. Next, expert opinion expressed in a treatise. This could be a textbook. So a standard textbook where the author is no more or the author is very far away, foreign author can't come to the court. In such cases, the opinion expressed in that particular textbook is accepted. Okay. Next, medical witness deposed in lower courts. So most of the time what happens, the court is heard in lower courts first, sessions court, then it goes for appeals in the higher court. There, the witness is not called again to give witness. Whatever lower court witness has been recorded in the courtroom, the same thing will be considered in the high court also without the presence of the person. Evidence given by a witness in previous judicial proceedings. So same case was going on previously, evidence was given by a person, was recorded in the courtroom, same evidence will be recorded and the person is not called to the courtroom. Report of certain government scientific officers. Who are they? They could be mint officers, mint, people in charge of money, or they can be chemical examiners. Chemical examiner. Or they could be in charge of Central Forensic Science Laboratory, directors of Central Forensic Science Laboratory, or chemical examiner director, or director of mint. So these people, whatever certificates or documents they issue, they are directly accepted in the court. Why? Because these people cannot leave their office. Okay, their work is in such a nature that going outside the office is difficult for them. Okay, so question. Dying declaration can be recorded by, yes, answer please. Fourth option, very good. So dying declaration can be accorded by all three people, but who is the best among them? Who is the best person? Second option, magistrate. Okay. So next options are changed. Dying declaration is, number one, always made by the magistrate. Cross-examination is not permitted. Has more value. Person is under oath. Which of them is correct?
Option 2.
Option 2. Cross-examination is not permitted. Okay. Where is it permitted? Which form?
In dying deposition.
Very good. In dying deposition, it will be permitted. Okay. Punishment for perjury falls under which section? This I have already described. This is the MCQ I have just put up to show the importance of those IPCs. So wherever the questions have been asked, I have indicated the IPC there only. So here the option I will just indicate it. It is option number 4. 191, we get the pointer. So 191 of the IPC describes what is perjury, and 193 gives the punishment for perjury. Okay. All are exempted from oral testimony except, number 1 is dying declaration, medical evidence of injury as witness, chemical examiner report, evidence of medical expert in lower court. So what is the answer here? Dying declaration is accepted? Second option. Okay. So dying declaration is straightforward accepted. Yes, for this the condition, only condition is person should have died. If he's alive, then this won't be accepted. But in normal conditions, dying declaration is accepted. Second thing, medical evidence of injury as a witness. Yes, this cannot be accepted unless the person comes and testifies. Okay. So this is directly accepted. I just told you, chemical examination report. This is issued by the chemical examiner. So this is accepted without oral testimony, and evidence of medical expert in lower courts. So once it has been discussed in the lower courts, it is directly accepted. Okay. So all are exempted from oral testimony except. Okay. Yes. The options are post-mortem report, dying declaration, report of mint officer, chemical examiner's report. Yeah. So I just told you in the previous slides, these three are exempted from oral testimony. If I issue the post-mortem, then I will be called to the court. Why? Because cross-examination is needed to accept the post-mortem report. Okay. Yes, the next question. Documentary evidence is accepted without oral evidence in which case? Answer please. I have indicated the answer. So it is all of the above. So dying declaration, yes, it is accepted. Evidence given by witness in previous judicial proceedings, yes. Chemical examiner's report, yes, this is also accepted. So option 4 says all of the above. So answer will be option 4. Okay. So that completes the presentation. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. We will. I will stop recording.
Okay, sir. Thanks, sir.
Students can leave.